interested in scrutinising the policies and positions of women, not their shoes or their bodies. I want the voices of women centred, and I want those to be the voices of every woman, not a homogenous group. It's not just those who are middle class, white, university educated and have access to power already. Yes, you deserve to be in politics, but there are women behind you who are so many steps behind, and if we're going to do it properly, it's your responsibility to look behind you and make way. This isn't part of any of the paragraphs that you'll see on the Women 50/50 website. On a personal level, I want women in positions of power, but I want feminists in positions of power. Get through the door and then wear your feminist badge with pride, I guess, is what I'm saying, unapologetically. I'd like you to try and take a photo of today and just tweet that out whenever you get a chance, because women are interested in politics. It's the system that has told them it's not for them. Women don't need quotas. Quotas are something that delegitimises politics. It lowers the standard of politics. Well, aside from that being lazy nonsense, it's also utterly inaccurate. And the last one is the idea that we currently operate in a meritocracy. Now, I'm not going to give you examples as to why that might not be the case.
We now have the list of candidates in for the election. You've been campaigning to get greater representation of women. How is the candidates list looking?
Well, in Scotland, from what we've checked so far, we have the Scottish Green Party and the Scottish Labour Party have reached 50% or above in the number of candidates. Scottish Conservatives are around 39%, SNP at 34%, and Scottish Liberal Democrats at 30%. So 3 out of 5 parties still have a far way to go.
It becomes pretty clear when listening to this woman for the second time in the space of 2 months that this is a lot more to do with what she deems power than it is to do with equality, considering the fact that it somehow indicates systemic structural barriers, etc., because there was a lack of female representation currently. So this justifies them pushing for 50-50 equal representation across the board, but yet by her own admission, at least 50-50%, meaning that if females later on down the line become overrepresented in Parliament, that's a-okay. So it's not inequality when females are overrepresented, but it's somehow a sign that society is regressing because they're underrepresented.
But the general issue has been around for years, hasn't it, Tal? Why is it so slow to make substantial differences?
Well, in fact, you're right to say that the pace of change has been glacial. And in fact, if you look at the 2007 election, the number of women in the Scottish Parliament has actually decreased from 40%. It's a combination of things. I think it's got a lot to do with an increasingly hostile and divisive political culture, which needs to change, social media abuse, and the fact that a disproportionate number of women in public life will suffer social media anonymous and frequent abuse, particularly women of colour. So there's a culture issue that needs to change, but also what parties do to reach out to women and find diverse candidates rather than sticking to who they already know and who puts themselves forward.
The responsibility of a political party to go out of their way to find a candidate that is deemed diverse, according to this woman, if they haven't put themselves forward. Just how she can gloss over the elephant in the room by her own admission that parties tend to stick with people that put themselves forward, tend to stick with people that they know, who people are familiar with. If a candidate that is deemed diverse enough, according to this woman, hasn't put themselves forward and expects a political party to go out of their way to find them, then don't be surprised when political parties fail to meet diversity targets.
It's focused on pushing for legislated candidate quotas. Now, what that means is there being legislation in place passed by the Scottish Parliament that would mean all political parties had to put forward at least 50% women candidates at every election. That includes the local council. Absolutely, and critically, whether they put all women shortlists in winnable seats, or if they give that to the people, particularly largely men, who they feel will be candidates who they have participated in the party for a longer period of time, so feel due to have that position of power. But to get to that fair representation of at least 50% women candidates, we need a change that means all parties have to do this.
Right.
At least 50%. So what happens if it's 60%? 65% women? So it's unfair because there's not equal representation, but the minute it goes over equal representation, it's still somehow deemed fair.
A lot of people will say, look, legalising, in effect, quotas is not a good idea. It's also difficult to see how legislation would necessarily address the point you just made, that it's not just about the number of constituencies in which there are all women shortlists. It's whether those constituencies, from the perspective of each party, are winnable, and you can't really expect the law to take a view on that.
No, but you can have the law set a tone for what parties have to do, and that they have to tackle the cultures and the exclusionary systems that they have internally to have to go and find 50% women candidates.
You want female politicians to be judged on their bodies and their sexuality, etc., etc. You want them to be judged on their policies, but yet you're expecting these people into Parliament purely because they are a woman. Again, this woman just seems to gloss over the fact that women are not putting themselves forward and women of colour aren't putting themselves forward. So if they don't put themselves forward, I don't really understand why it's the responsibility of a political party to then go out of their way to find out if people that didn't put themselves forward want to put themselves forward. If somebody wants to put themselves forward, then so be it. But if they didn't put themselves forward, I can't understand why there is frustration being displayed here when diversity targets aren't met.
But progress is being made, is it?
Well, in this particular election across the UK, we've had the highest number of women candidates standing, but that is still only a third of candidates.
Okay, Tala, Jakub, thank you very much indeed.
It was a third of men and the rest were all women, preferably women of colour, am I right? That would be a-okay. That would still somehow constitute equality. It's only inequality. It's only an indication of a regressing society, a sexist culture that needs to change because there isn't at least 50-50 representation. On more than one occasion, she has mentioned the fact that these people are not applying for these positions. And then it should be incumbent on political parties to then go out of their way to find these people instead. So how can it be a case that meritocracy is a myth when the people that you want to see in Parliament aren't even applying for these roles?